Chapter 1. My name is Elena Hart, and the moment I signed that contract, my life stopped being mine. It was supposed to be simple. A contract, a signature, a fake marriage with no emotions attached. That was the deal. Clean, controlled, temporary. Exactly the kind of arrangement someone like me needed. Because I didn't have the luxury of choices anymore. Not after everything that had happened. Not after the debts, the pressure, the slow, suffocating weight of a life that had been falling apart piece by piece. When the offer came, I didn't hesitate. I couldn't afford to marry him for 1 year, play the perfect wife, walk away with financial freedom. No questions asked, no feelings involved. It sounded almost too easy. And maybe that should have been my first warning, but I didn't question it. I didn't question him. Adrian Vale. Even saying his name felt dangerous. He was the kind of man people didn't approach unless they had a reason, and even then they thought twice. Cold, calculated, untouchable. A CEO who controlled everything around him with quiet precision. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show emotion. He didn't need to. Power followed him without effort. And now, somehow, I was about to become his wife. The first time I saw him in person, I understood why people feared him. He didn't greet me, didn't offer a smile, just looked at me, slowly, carefully, like he was studying something he already understood. His eyes lingered longer than they should have, and for a brief moment I felt exposed. Like he could see through every layer I had built to protect myself. "Elena Hart," he said, his voice low, controlled. Not a question, a statement. I nodded, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "Adrian Vale." Something unreadable flickered in his expression, gone before I could understand it. Then he slid the contract across the table toward me. "Read it." No small talk, no explanations, just business. That should have made me feel relieved. This was what I wanted, a transaction, nothing more. I picked up the document, scanning the pages even though I already knew what it contained. 1 year, public appearances, absolute discretion, no emotional involvement. And one clause that made my fingers tighten slightly around the paper: we act as a real married couple when necessary. I hesitated for half a second before looking up. Define necessary. His gaze didn't waver. "You'll understand when the time comes." Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't personal. It couldn't be. "And after 1 year?" I asked. "We walk away," he said simply. Clean, final, exactly what I needed. So why did it feel like there was something he wasn't saying? The silence stretched between us, heavy but not uncomfortable, just intense, like he was waiting, watching, as if my answer mattered more than it should. I lowered my gaze back to the contract. This was my way out, my solution, my only option. I didn't have the luxury to second-guess this. Not now, not ever. My hand steadied as I reached for the pen, just one signature. That was all it took, one moment, one decision, and everything would change. I signed my name. The sound of the pen against paper echoed louder than it should have. Final, irreversible. When I looked up again, Adrian was already watching me. Not surprised, not satisfied. Just certain, like this had always been the outcome. "Good," he said quietly, taking the contract back. And for the first time, a strange, unshakable feeling settled in my chest. Not relief, not fear, something else. Something I didn't understand yet. Because as I sat there, across from the man who was now legally bound to me, one thought crossed my mind. This wasn't just a deal. And somehow, I had just stepped into something far more dangerous than I ever intended. Chapter 2. I didn't expect my wedding day to feel like a business transaction. There was no music, no crowd, no warmth, just a quiet room, a table, and the final step of an agreement that had already been decided the moment I signed that contract. Adrian Vale stood beside me, calm and composed, like this was nothing more than another deal closing in his favor. The officiant spoke, his voice polite but distant, and I barely registered the words. Husband, wife, marriage. They felt hollow, stripped of meaning, reduced to nothing more than formalities. When it was my turn to sign, my hand didn't shake. It should have, but it didn't, because I had already accepted this. Already convinced myself that this was necessary, temporary, controlled. I signed my name, and just like that, it was done. "Congratulations," the officiant said, but the word felt misplaced. Adrian nodded once, acknowledging it without emotion, before turning to me. "Mrs. Vale." The title landed heavier than I expected. I met his gaze, forcing composure. "Mr. Vale." For a moment, something unreadable flickered in his eyes, then disappeared just as quickly. The car ride to his house was silent, filled only with the quiet hum of the engine and the weight of something I couldn't quite name. He didn't look at me, didn't speak, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Sitting beside him felt like being watched even in stillness. His house was exactly what I imagined, large, pristine, and cold. Every detail was perfect, but nothing felt lived in. It was a space designed for control, not comfort. "This will be your home," he said as we stepped inside. "Not ours. Yours." I nodded, accepting the boundary he had drawn. A member of the staff greeted us shortly after, addressing me as Mrs. Vale with a polite smile that made the title feel even more real. Adrian led me upstairs without hesitation, stopping in front of a door before opening it. "This is the bedroom." I stepped inside and immediately understood. One bed, one space, shared. I turned to him, my expression tightening slightly. That wasn't part of the agreement. He leaned casually against the doorframe, his gaze steady. It was implied. It wasn't specified. "And yet," he said calmly, "it's necessary." That word again, necessary. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay composed. This was part of the image, the illusion, the perfect marriage we were expected to present. "Fine," I said, the word heavier than I intended. The first night was quieter than I expected. He kept his distance, made no move to close the space between us, didn't touch me unnecessarily. He simply lay beside me, calm and still, like this arrangement meant nothing more to him than it was supposed to. And yet, I couldn't sleep. I was aware of everything, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the closeness of his presence, the silence that felt heavier than words. "You're awake," he said suddenly, his voice low and certain. I turned slightly surprised. "So are you." A pause. "Get used to it," he replied. I frowned faintly. "Meaning, this won't feel normal at first," he said. "But it will." I didn't respond because I wasn't sure I believed him. The days that followed were exactly what we agreed to. Publicly, we were flawless. We stood close, spoke easily, moved like a couple who had known each other for years. People believed it. They saw perfection. But behind closed doors, we remained strangers, existing side by side without truly crossing into each other's worlds. And yet, something didn't feel right. Because sometimes, when I wasn't looking directly at him, I could feel it. His gaze lingering on me, steady, unwavering. And when I turned to catch him, he never looked away. That was when I realized something I hadn't expected. Adrian Vale didn't look at me like I was a stranger. He looked at me like he already knew me. Chapter 3. Living with Adrian Vale felt like existing beside a mystery I wasn't meant to solve. Every movement he made was controlled, every word measured, every expression carefully restrained. He woke early, left before the sun fully rose, and returned late, his presence filling the house without ever truly disturbing its silence. To the world, he was flawless, untouchable, powerful, respected. And to me, he was unreadable. At first, I told myself that was a good thing. This wasn't a real marriage. I wasn't supposed to understand him. I wasn't supposed to get close. But the longer I stayed, the harder it became to ignore the details, the small things, the things that didn't fit. It started with how he looked at me. Not constantly, not obviously, but enough that I began to notice. A glance that lingered just a second too long. A pause before he spoke, like he was choosing his words more carefully than necessary. And sometimes, when he thought I wasn't paying attention, he would simply watch me. Like he was trying to remember something, or confirm it. One morning, I walked into the kitchen expecting to find it empty, only to see him already there, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, a cup of coffee in his hand. He didn't look surprised to see me. "You wake up earlier than I expected," he said. His tone was neutral, but his eyes lingered. "And you observe more than I expected," I replied, reaching for a cup. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, placing another cup in front of me before I could pour my own. "No sugar," he said. I froze. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the counter. "I didn't tell you that." His expression didn't change. "You didn't have to." A quiet unease settled in my chest. It wasn't just the coffee. It was the certainty in his voice, the way he said it like it was obvious, like it was something he had always known. I brushed it off, forcing myself to stay calm. "Lucky guess." He didn't respond, but something in his gaze suggested he didn't believe that. Or maybe he knew it wasn't true. That wasn't the only time. He noticed things I never mentioned. The way I avoided certain foods. The way I got quiet when I was thinking too much. The way I hesitated before answering certain questions. It was subtle but consistent. And it didn't make sense, because I had never given him the chance to know me that well. One evening, we attended a formal event together, standing side by side as cameras flashed and people whispered about how perfect we looked. His hand rested lightly on my waist, steady and controlled, just enough to maintain the illusion. But when someone asked me a question I didn't want to answer, I hesitated. just for a second, and before I could respond, Adrian spoke instead. Smooth, effortless, redirecting the conversation without drawing attention, saving me. I glanced at him, surprised, but he didn't look at me. He was already moving forward, guiding me with him like he knew exactly what I needed without me saying a word. Later that night, as we returned home, I couldn't ignore it anymore. "How do you do that?" I asked quietly. He paused slightly, turning his head just enough to meet my eyes. "Do what?" "No things," I said. "Things I never told you." Silence followed, not awkward, not tense, just deliberate. Then he stepped closer, his gaze steady, unreadable as always. "You think I don't pay attention?" he asked, my breath caught, because it wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it, like there was more behind it, more than simple observation, more than coincidence. And in that moment, I realized something that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. Adrian Vale wasn't just watching me. He was remembering me. Chapter 4. It started with things I couldn't explain. Small, quiet details that didn't fit into the neat boundaries of our arrangement. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it. That Adrian was simply observant. That this was part of who he was, someone who noticed everything because control demanded it. But the longer I stayed, the more those small things began to feel like something else entirely. Something personal. Something intentional. It showed up in ways I didn't expect. One evening, I skipped dinner, claiming I wasn't hungry, retreating to the living room with a book I had no intention of reading. I thought he wouldn't notice. He always seemed distant enough, focused on his own world, his own routine. But an hour later, he appeared beside me, placing a plate on the table without a word. I looked up, startled. "I said I wasn't hungry." "You didn't eat lunch either," he replied calmly. My chest tightened. I hadn't told him that. I didn't even remember him being around when I skipped it. "You're keeping track of my meals now?" I asked, trying to sound unaffected. "You're in my house," he said simply. "That makes it my concern." The words were straightforward, but there was something beneath them I couldn't quite name. I looked down at the plate, then back at him. "You don't have to do this." "I know." A pause, then quieter. "I want to." That should have been enough to dismiss it as nothing more than courtesy. But it was. Because nothing Adrian did ever felt accidental. Another time, we were preparing for an event, and I hesitated in front of my wardrobe longer than I should have. I hadn't decided what to wear, but before I could reach for anything, he stepped into the room and picked a dress without asking. "This one," he said, handing it to me. I stared at it. It was perfect. Not just elegant, not just appropriate, but exactly what I would have chosen after overthinking for 20 minutes. "How did you?" I stopped myself. There was no answer that would make sense. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. He simply turned away like it was obvious, like he had always known. And then there were the moments that unsettled me the most. The ones that felt too familiar, too practiced. Like when he reached for my hand in public, his grip firm but natural, like it belonged there. Or the way he would adjust something small, my sleeve, a strand of hair, without hesitation, without asking, like he had done it before, like it wasn't new to him. Those moments stayed with me longer than they should have, because they didn't feel like part of an act. They felt like something he didn't have to think about, something instinctive. And that was what didn't make sense, because we were strangers, weren't we? One night I caught him again, watching me, not openly, not in a way anyone else would notice. But I saw it, the way his gaze softened just slightly before he looked away. That was when I couldn't ignore it anymore. "Why do you look at me like that?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it broke the silence between us. He didn't answer immediately, just held my gaze steady, unreadable. "Like what?" he asked. I hesitated because I didn't know how to explain it. "Like you know me," I said finally. The words felt heavier than they should have. Something shifted in his expression. Not much. Just enough that I noticed. Then he looked away. "Maybe I do," he said. My breath caught. Because for the first time since this began, I felt it clearly. This wasn't just a contract, and whatever was happening between us wasn't part of the deal. Chapter 5. There was a difference between acting and reality, and somewhere along the way, I stopped being able to tell where one ended and the other began. At first, every touch between us had been calculated, measured, necessary, a performance for the world watching us too closely. His hand at my waist during events. My arm looped through his as we walked into rooms filled with people who expected perfection. It was part of the role, nothing more. That's what I told myself. That's what I needed to believe. But the longer we lived this way, the more those touches began to change. They lingered. Not long enough to draw attention, but long enough for me to notice. Long enough for me to feel it. One evening, we attended another formal gathering. The the kind filled with quiet conversations and careful smiles. Cameras flashed, voices blended, and eyes followed us as we moved together like we had practiced it for years. Adrian's hand rested at the small of my back, steady and warm through the fabric of my dress. It was nothing unusual, nothing new, and yet my body reacted like it was. I was hyper-aware of it. The way his fingers curved slightly, the subtle pressure guiding me forward, the quiet control in the gesture that felt less like an act and more like instinct. When someone approached us, he pulled me just a fraction closer. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but I did. My breath caught just for a second before I forced myself to stay composed. This was part of the image, nothing more. It had to be. Later that night, as we stood on the balcony away from the crowd, the silence between us felt heavier than usual. I leaned lightly against the railing, needing the space, needing the distance. But he didn't move away. Instead, he stepped closer, too close. His presence surrounded me, steady and unshakable. "You're tense," he said quietly. I let out a small breath. "Occupational hazard." His hand found mine before I could react. Not sudden, not forceful, just deliberate. My fingers stilled as his closed around them, his grip firm but not tight. I should have pulled away. I didn't. I told myself it was because we were still in public view, because this was still part of the act. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth, because this didn't feel like acting. It felt real. I glanced at him, but he wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed somewhere in the distance, calm, unreadable. And yet, his hand didn't let go. "You're overthinking," he said, like he could hear every thought running through my mind. "Maybe," I replied softly, my voice quieter than I intended. His thumb moved slightly against my skin, a small motion, almost absent-minded, but it sent something through me I wasn't prepared for. My heart skipped, my breath uneven, my thoughts unraveling in ways I couldn't control. This wasn't part of the deal, none of this was, and yet neither of us stepped back. When we returned inside, his hand shifted from mine to my waist again, guiding me effortlessly through the room. But now, everything felt different. Every touch lingered longer than it should have. Every movement carried a weight I couldn't ignore. And for the first time since this arrangement began, I realized something that unsettled me more than anything else. I wasn't pretending anymore, and I wasn't sure he ever was. Chapter 6. I didn't notice when it started. There was no single moment, no clear shift, no obvious line that I crossed. It happened quietly, slowly in the spaces between everything else. In the way I began to anticipate his presence before he entered a room. In the way silence felt different when he was near, no longer empty but filled with something steady and grounding. In the way I stopped questioning why he noticed things about me that no one else ever had. At first, I told myself it didn't mean anything, that this was just proximity, just routine, just the natural result of living with someone who paid attention. But the truth was harder to ignore the longer I stayed. Because Adrian didn't just observe me, he understood me. And that was something I wasn't prepared for. It showed up in the smallest moments. The way he would place a glass of water beside me before I realized I was thirsty. The way he would end conversations when he sensed I was overwhelmed, stepping in without making it obvious. The way he would look at me, not cold, not distant, but with something quieter, something deeper that I couldn't name without letting myself fall into it. That was the problem. I wasn't supposed to fall. This was temporary. A contract. A role, nothing more. I reminded myself of that constantly. Especially at night, when the world went quiet and there was nothing left to distract me from the reality of how close he was. The shared space. The shared bed. The quiet awareness of him beside me. It had stopped feeling unfamiliar. And that terrified me. One night I turned slightly, watching him in the dim light. His expression was relaxed, his features softened by sleep, the sharp edges of the man the world feared gone in the stillness of the moment. He looked different like this. Less distant, more real. My chest tightened unexpectedly, something unfamiliar settling beneath my ribs. I looked away quickly, forcing myself to close my eyes. This wasn't real. None of it was. But the next morning, when he handed me my coffee without asking, when his fingers brushed mine just briefly, when his gaze lingered for a fraction longer than necessary, it didn't feel fake. And that was the problem. I started noticing everything. The way he said my name. The way his voice softened just slightly when we were alone. The way he stood closer than required, like distance wasn't something he needed between us. And the worst part was I stopped resisting it. I didn't pull away as quickly. I didn't question it as much. I let it happen. Slowly, quietly, without realizing how deep I had already gone. Until one evening it hit me all at once. We were sitting across from each other, the space between us calm, familiar, too familiar. And as I looked at him, really looked at him, I felt it clearly for the first time. Not confusion, not curiosity, something deeper, something dangerous. My breath caught, my fingers tightening slightly against the table. Because the truth settled in before I could stop it. I had fallen for him. And that was the one thing I was never supposed to do. Chapter 7. By the time I realized something was wrong, it was already too late to pretend I hadn't noticed. The feeling had been building for days, quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the way Adrian watched me anymore. It was everything. The way he anticipated my actions before I made them. The way he knew things I had never told him. The way nothing about his behavior felt like coincidence. I told myself I was overthinking, that there had to be a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew there was, and that terrified me more than anything else. It started with something small. It always did. I was in his study looking for a document he had mentioned earlier when I found it. A folder, plain, unlabeled. It shouldn't have meant anything. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. And the moment I saw what was inside, everything changed. My breath caught, my fingers tightening around the edge of the paper as I stared down at it. A photograph. Old. Slightly worn at the edges. And in it was me, younger, smiling, completely unaware. My mind went blank for a second, struggling to process what I was seeing. This didn't make sense. I had never given him this. I had never even seen this photo before. My heart started racing, each beat louder than the last as a cold realization began to settle in. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. I flipped through the folder, my movements faster now, more desperate. More photos, notes, dates. Small details about my life. Things no one should know unless they had been watching for a long time. My chest tightened, panic creeping in at the edges of my thoughts. How long had he known? The sound of the door opening behind me made me freeze. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew it was him. The air shifted, heavy with his presence, calm and controlled as always. You weren't supposed to find that yet. His voice was low, steady, unchanged. Like this didn't matter. Like this was expected. I slowly turned, the folder still clutched in my hands, my heart pounding in a way I couldn't control. What is this? My voice wasn't as steady as I wanted it to be. His gaze dropped briefly to the folder, then back to me. No surprise, no panic, just quiet acceptance. The truth, he said. That wasn't enough. You've been watching me, I demanded, the words sharper now, laced with something close to fear. He stepped closer, unhurried, his expression as unreadable as ever. Not watching, he said calmly. Looking. My breath caught. That didn't make it better. If anything, it made it worse. For what? I asked. For a moment, he didn't answer. Just stood there, studying me in that same way he always had, like he was seeing more than I was showing. Then, finally, for you. The words hit harder than anything else he could have said. My mind struggled to keep up, to make sense of something that didn't fit into the reality I thought I understood. This doesn't make sense, I whispered. I don't even remember. I stopped, the thought forming too slowly, too late. His gaze didn't waver. I know, he said quietly. And that was when everything shifted. Because the way he said it, certain, steady, final, made one thing painfully clear. I might not remember the past, but he did. Chapter 8. I didn't sleep that night. The images from the folder replayed over and over in my mind, each one sharper than the last. The photograph, the dates, the notes, pieces of my life I didn't even remember being recorded, preserved like something important, something worth holding on to. But none of it made sense. Not to me. Because no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't recall a single moment where Adrian Vale existed in my past. And yet, he had proof that I existed in his. I sat on the edge of the bed, the room dim and quiet, my thoughts tangled and restless. He hadn't tried to stop me from leaving the study. Hadn't tried to explain further. He had simply let me walk away with the truth half-spoken, like he knew I wouldn't be able to ignore it, like he knew I would come back. And he was right. I found him exactly where I expected, standing by the window in his study, the city lights reflecting faintly against the glass. His posture was calm, composed, like nothing had changed. Like he hadn't just shattered everything I thought I understood about this marriage. About him, about us. You're going to explain, I said, my voice quieter than I intended but steady enough to carry. He didn't turn immediately, just stood there for a moment before finally facing me, his gaze settling on mine with that same unsettling calm. What do you remember? He asked. I frowned, the question catching me off guard. Nothing, I said. That's the problem. His eyes didn't leave mine. Then I'll remind you. Something in my chest tightened at the way he said it, soft, deliberate, like this wasn't just information to him, like it meant something more. He stepped closer, the distance between us closing slowly, intentionally. 7 years ago, he began, his voice low, controlled, you helped someone. I searched his expression, trying to find something familiar, anything, but there was nothing. You didn't know who I was, he continued, cutting me off gently. And I didn't tell you. My breath caught slightly, the pieces not quite fitting but starting to form an outline of something I couldn't fully see. You were just there, he said, at the right moment. When I needed it. His gaze shifted slightly, like he was seeing something else entirely. Not me standing in front of him now, but someone from before. You stayed, he added quietly, when you didn't have to. A strange feeling stirred in my chest, faint, distant, like something just out of reach. I don't remember that, I whispered. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened just slightly. I know, he said again, but I do. Silence fell between us, heavier this time, filled with everything I didn't know and everything he clearly did. So you what? I asked, my voice uncertain now. You spent years looking for me. Yes, the answer came without hesitation. My heart stuttered, the weight of that single word settling in ways I wasn't prepared for. Why? I asked, the question barely leaving my lips. He stepped closer again, close enough now that I could feel the quiet steadiness of his presence, the warmth of it, the intensity that never wavered. Because you didn't forget me, he said softly, my breath caught. You just don't remember yet. The words lingered between us, unsettling and impossible to ignore, because deep down something inside me stirred. Not a memory, not fully, but a feeling, familiar, and suddenly I wasn't sure if I wanted to remember. Or if I was afraid of what I might find if I did. Chapter 9. I told myself I could still leave. Even after everything I had seen, everything he had said, I clung to the one thing that had been clear from the beginning. This was temporary. A contract. A deal with an end date. No emotions. No complications. No attachments. That was what I agreed to. That was what I needed. Because whatever this was becoming, it was no longer safe. Not for me. Not for the version of myself that had spent years learning how to survive without depending on anyone. So I packed, quietly. Efficiently, I didn't take much, just what I had brought with me, nothing more. I didn't want to leave anything behind that might tie me back here, back to him. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight, like something inside me was resisting every movement I made. I ignored it. This was the right choice. It had to be. When I finished, I paused at the door, my fingers resting against the handle. One step. That was all it would take. One step, and this would be over. Just like we agreed. Leaving. His voice came from behind me, calm and quiet, but enough to stop me instantly. I closed my eyes briefly before turning around. He was standing there, just inside the room, his expression unreadable as always, like he had been expecting this, like he had known all along. We had an agreement, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. No emotions, no complications, I'm just following through. He didn't move closer right away. Just watched me, his gaze sharp, focused, like he was studying every detail of my decision. Is that what this is? He asked. I swallowed, tightening my grip on the handle. Yes. Silence stretched between us, heavy, pressing. Then he took a step forward, slow, deliberate. You're running, he said. I'm leaving, I corrected, my voice sharper now. There's a difference. Not to me. My breath caught just slightly, but I forced myself not to react. This was never meant to be permanent, I said. You said it yourself. 1 year, that's the deal. And you think that's all this is? He asked quietly. Something in his tone made my chest tighten. I shook my head, pushing the feeling down. That's what we agreed on. He stopped a few steps away from me, close enough that I could feel the tension in the space between us, the quiet intensity that never seemed to leave when he was near. Look at me, he said. I hesitated for half a second before meeting his gaze, and immediately I felt it. The shift. Difference. There was nothing distant about him now, nothing controlled or detached, just something steady, certain. Did you really think I married you for nothing? The words hit harder than I expected. My mind struggled to catch up, to process what he was saying, what he meant. This wasn't convenience, he continued, his voice low but unwavering. It wasn't strategy, and it definitely wasn't random. My heart started racing, the truth pressing in before I was ready for it. Then what was it? I asked, my voice quieter now, almost uncertain. He held my gaze, not looking away, not giving me a chance to escape it. You, he said, one word, simple, final, my breath caught. I chose you, he continued. Long before this contract existed, long before you walked back into my life. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, everything closing in around me as his words settled into something I couldn't ignore. "You think this is something you can walk away from," he said, stepping closer again, his presence overwhelming in the quiet space. "But you were never meant to leave." I should have stepped back. I didn't. Because somewhere, deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just a contract. It never was. And the moment I signed it, I didn't just agree to a deal. I stepped into something that had already begun long before I even knew it existed. Chapter 10. I didn't leave. Even after everything, even after knowing the truth, I stood there with my hand still on the door, unable to move forward or back. Because for the first time since this began, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This was never just a contract to him, and somewhere along the way, it had stopped being just a contract to me too. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with everything unsaid, everything I was still trying to process, everything he had already known long before I stepped into his life again. I slowly let go of the door handle, my fingers falling to my side as I turned fully toward him. His gaze didn't waver. It never did. But there was something different in it now, something less guarded, less distant, something real. "You should have told me," I said quietly. It wasn't anger. Not entirely. More like the weight of realizing how much had been hidden from me, how much I had walked into without understanding. He didn't deny it, didn't try to justify it immediately. "You wouldn't have stayed," he said simply. My breath caught because he was right. If I had known from the beginning about the past, about him, about what this really meant, I would have run. I would have avoided him completely. "That wasn't your decision to make," I replied, my voice steadier now, even as my chest tightened. "No," he agreed, "but it was the only way to make sure you didn't disappear again." The words settled heavily between us, not forceful, not controlling, just honest, and somehow that made them harder to fight. I searched his expression, looking for something, manipulation, calculation, anything that would make this easier to push away. But there was nothing, just certainty. "You've been holding on to something I don't even remember," I said. "How is that fair?" His gaze softened slightly, the shift subtle but unmistakable. "It's not," he admitted, "but that doesn't make it any less real." That was the problem. None of this felt unreal anymore. Not the way he looked at me, not the way he knew me, not the way my heart reacted every time he stepped closer. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady the thoughts running through my mind. "And now?" I asked. "What happens now?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he closed the distance between us completely, stopping just close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the quiet intensity that had always been there but felt different now, stronger, clearer, impossible to ignore. "Now," he said, his voice low, "you decide." I blinked, caught off guard. "That's it?" "Yes." His gaze held mine, steady and unwavering. "No more contracts, no more conditions. If you stay, it's because you choose to." My heart stuttered at the words, at the unexpected freedom in them. For so long, I had told myself I was trapped in this arrangement, bound by something temporary but inescapable. But standing here now, I realized that wasn't true anymore. I had a choice. And somehow that made everything more terrifying, because if I stayed, it wouldn't be because I had to. It would be because I wanted to. I looked at him, really looked this time at the man who had been waiting for me long before I even knew his name. The man who had built everything around control but was now standing in front of me, offering me the one thing he rarely gave anyone: freedom. And in that moment, the truth became clear in a way I couldn't deny. This marriage had never been fake. Not to him, and not to me anymore either. I took a step forward, closing the last inch of space between us, my voice quiet but certain. "Then I'm staying." The end. This was brought to you by Romance Hobbit. Thank you for watching.